We welcome to the studio today one of our regular guests to The Source. Sherri Darlene is the founder of Justice for Black Lives. Today we begin a new series called Essential Watch, and we begin by looking at the Netflix series When They See Us. Why is this important?
This is an essential watch because it exposes the details of that system that Black people have so desperately been trying to get people who it doesn't affect to understand, learn about, and help with dismantling it.
1989, 5 young boys between the ages of 13 and 16, they were accused of brutally raping and beating a jogger in Central Park.
Yes, they are now called the Exonerated Five. But to begin with, they were the Central Park Five. These young boys were absolutely just brutalized by the justice system in the United States. And I think the reason why I came up with this Essential Watch was I was really shocked to find out the people who should be watching this, who are not affected by systemic racism, had not watched it. The people who should be watching this, who are in denial of the system, which is why I think white supremacy and systemic racism has been able to stay untouched for so long, is because we've got a lot of denial out there. I call it the great white denial, that it just doesn't exist, it's not that bad. The thing with this is that this is not a one-time incident. This is just a spotlight put on this system and these boys because the story is it's such an atrocity.
I'm watching it as a white man, and I feel for these kids and I feel for their parents because, and I think this is what makes it essential for us to watch because, I mean, maybe as a white man, I'm not going to be as affected by watching another 45-year-old or 50-year-old being mistreated by the justice system. But by watching someone who I can relate to as a child being mistreated, that makes it even harder for me to take.
Yeah, it was just absolutely insidious right from the beginning. As I mentioned to you prior, it was very difficult for me to watch the first episode. The first time I tried to watch it, once I saw what they were doing to these boys.
You're a mother of a young boy.
Yes.
Not as young as these boys now, but he was that young.
Yes, that could have been my son. You know, I had to skip episode 1 and go right to episode 2 because I could not watch what I essentially knew down the road was these young men's lives being destroyed.
Episode 2 is where we see someone we all know, Donald Trump, and Trump is so incensed by this incident that he calls for the death penalty for these 5 young boys. And this is something in 2016, when he was running for president, he was asked about this, and he still stands by his comments that they should have been put to death.
Yes, and this is what we as Black people in the Black community, we call modern day lynching. This is exactly what happened to these young boys. No, their bodies weren't swinging from a tree, but this is a system that these boys were put into. And again, we knew right from the beginning, and they knew right from the beginning, these boys were innocent. There was no DNA match. There was the lead investigator. She just was so hell-bent on having somebody held accountable or letting the community know that she just disregarded all of the evidence that spoke to it's not them.
I guess there had been a lot of violence in the park, in Central Park, over a few months. It was almost convenient that she had these scapegoats that she could easily railroad and, show as the solution.
Yes, and one of the things that you really should pay attention to is, you and I were discussing, is that white solidarity that you see so clearly in this system where at any given time, anyone could have stepped up and said, no, what you're doing is wrong, this is wrong. There were lots of people that did not like what she was doing, but they went along with it. They kept their mouth shut. It was horrible what happened to them.
They all spent time in prison. The eldest kid, Corey Wise, was in prison the longest, and he was in an adult prison, so his horrors were even worse than what the other 4 boys
Yes, he went to one of the worst prisons in the United States at the age of 15.
We've seen them in interviews, an Oprah Winfrey special also on Netflix. We've seen them in interviews talking about how their lives have been affected, continue to be affected today, 23 years later.
Yes, one of the
I should say 33 years later.
One of the young men, Oprah asked him, how are you? Are you okay? And he said, no, I'm not okay. I'm never going to be okay. I'm angry. I have to go and, talk to a counselor. My wife is pushing him. I have to leave all the time because I'm so angry and go for a ride. And I'm just not okay, and I'm never going to be okay. If you ask me, $42 million to split between the 5 of them, they could have done better than that. They should have gave those boys $1 million for every minute they spent in that ridiculous system.
And what you're bringing up is the settlement that came out after the actual rapist
Yes.
confessed. And that, another fascinating element to this is that the person who finally confessed to it in 2002, which was so long after, 13 years after, he actually was in prison at the same time in the same prison with Corey Wise.
Yes, and had he not admitted that, where would Corey Wise be today? He probably still would be in the system somewhere, but it took for this man, and if you see watching the documentary, he really had to push forward to get them to understand, no, I did this. I did this, I'm telling you, this is how I did it, this is when I did it, this is, what I did, and they still weren't willing to accept that.
No, they wanted to tag him as the 6th.
Yes.
The Central Park 6th.
Yes, and you remember that the youngest one was 13 years old, and just watching him in that interview, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. Well, if you tell us you did this and you say you did this, you can go home. And it stings. And as Black people, we want the world to know, we want our allies to know, this still happens. This still happens. This unjust system is still at play. White supremacy, white solidarity, systemic racism, it is still very much alive. And these Essential Watch, I think when you sit down, it exposes you to the system that either you don't want to know about, willful ignorance, or you just really have no idea the depth of it.
Sherri, it's a great series. What is the message you want me to take from this?
I'd like you to take from this the exposure to the system, the details on how the system is upheld today, how it still is active today, and being an active ally, link arms with us, walk in these rooms with us, and help us dismantle this from within.
Well, I hope that I can continue to be an ally and look forward to our next session and what we're going to dig into in that one. Sherri Darlene, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.